Hey everyone! Welcome back to another community call with the Althea team. I am Deborah Sampier, the CEO of Hawk Networks, and Hawk Networks got started back in 2017 with the idea of rebuilding the systems of utility and telecom, and created a platform called Althea and incubated that, and now it has become the Althea ecosystem and Althea L1, and a fellow OG in the space, in the intersection there of really driving forward the future economy and economy of machines and AI is Fraser from cheqd. And I'm super excited to chat with you today. How are you doing, Fraser?
Good. It's almost the weekend, and it's been an extremely long week, so really looking forward to getting through to it. Just to explain that, like our team came down. We spent Monday, Tuesday working together, but that obviously inevitably means also going out for drinks in the UK, and then had yet more events on Wednesday, Thursday. So it's been a long week. It feels like it's like Saturday, and for some reason I'm still working. It's kind of lent. So yeah, but thanks for having us, and yeah, looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah. So I've known you for a long time. And yeah, maybe you can just kind of share a little bit about what cheqd is and where it's, kind of that intersection around identity. I'm really curious to kind of like deep dive a little bit more on where you're at right now too with things and how that's evolved. I know you've been around building for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started cheqd, I guess for context as well. So I'm Fraser, I'm CEO, one of the co-founders. Prior to co-founding cheqd, I worked for Accenture, so big obviously SI consulting firm. Did a mix of blockchain, biometrics, AI, and then really fell down a self-sovereign decentralized ID rabbit hole. Was very lucky to work with a couple of central banks on cross-blockchain payments, working as well on deploying decentralized ID for international travel. But we founded cheqd 4 years ago to focus on decentralized ID, mainly on getting data back into the hands of individuals, and doing so in a sustainable way. So obviously lots of companies still have these massive data silos of data on people. And we wanted to create a system where they were incentivized to release it back to individuals. We started off by building and deploying a decentralized ID network built on Cosmos, which obviously on the links with Althea, and actually we make use still of the Gravity Bridge. Yeah. And we also then have built that out with trust registries, with revocation registries, and we've always stayed at the infrastructure layer, so we've never deployed like solutions ourselves for specific use cases. Instead, we work with I think 20 to 30 partners around the world who do those individual use cases. So they'll do reusable KYC or business licensing or education stuff. But from the start of last year, we obviously saw this movement into agents, AI generally. And one of the things that we've seen a huge amount of growth of since the start of this year is trust registries for agents. How do you know they were built by someone trustworthy? How do you know they're representing the right company? Have they been security audited? Have they been generally audited to the kind of regulation? And kind of that's one of the areas that we've seen a huge amount of traction, as well as obviously kind of the payments for credential infrastructure that we developed originally. So yeah, that's I guess a whistle stop on myself and cheqd.
Super interesting stuff, and it's been really fun to see this sort of market merge around this right now, and the urgency. Like, I mean, this is same for us, right? We back in 2017 we started building, and people thought it was crazy to have microtransactions and things like that for billing, and now it sort of seems inevitable. I think probably the same thing for y'all as well. It's like, oh yeah, obviously.
Honestly, the biggest thing that caught us by surprise was in this whole decentralized ID SSI world, there was always this idea of AI agents. It was always this idea that if you're an individual controlling all this, controlling and owning all this data, it's going to be like fitting or being hit by a fire hose and then also fire hosing stuff out the other side. And as an individual, how are you meant to control that? And the idea was always this like silver bullet panacea was going to be AI agents doing all of that for you. And I
Right.
think we all thought it would be like a 5 to 10 year thing where it's like we get all the credential stuff in place, we get all blah, 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 and then someone goes and solves all the agent problems. And it's basically gone in reverse. Like agents have overtaken the decentralized ID stuff in terms of speed, but it's been a massive opportunity in terms of what we're seeing on the network, both testnet and mainnet. And it also neatly is coming along when like decentralized ID adoption is really picking up, and so having AI agents at the same time has been absolutely ideal.
It's interesting because we get to rapidly iterate right on the process, but I still think to your point, we've got a little long ways to go. I mean, we work at the intersection of utility, so even just the way that like SIM cards authenticate the networks, there's so much integration friction. I mean, we're not quite a green field, and I think that's really where like things get a little bit gummed up. But interested in you talked about these trust registries. How does that work?
So I'm going to do my best to explain it when the real expert from our team is Alex. So the idea is that you have this hierarchy of trust. Typically, the easiest way of explaining it is actually to refer back to sole sovereign ID as like a term. And there's been, over time, there's been pushback and a move away from SSI to decentralized ID or other terms. And the reason behind that was SSI kind of gives the idea that you are sovereign and you can just state stuff, which you can, but it doesn't mean anything until someone else corroborates it. And that's where kind of credentials and trust registries really come in, which is, let's say you're saying something about yourself. If you can do that with a credential that is from the right place, suddenly that has way higher trust and way higher value than you just openly stating it. The obvious one is passports. Me saying I'm a citizen of wherever means nothing until I can present some document, which is either a birth certificate, an ID card, or a passport. And if I present one that like I just made up, that obviously doesn't mean anything. But if I present a credential from the government, obviously it's from the right place. Now, if you kind of extend that to other credentials, the example I often give is receipts. So receipts, obviously, for most people are in paper form. There's a bit of a thing in the UK. I don't know if it's the same in the US, where people are starting to move them to email addresses. But that whole experience is super clunky. It's still ending up in your inbox. You're going to lose it. And it's still not really a guarantee that it's coming from the right place. But what you can do with credentials is you can move them from, you can say, get a credential issued for a receipt. And you can prove that it came from the right place. And let's say you buy like a laptop or a TV or something, and you want to get it insured, you can forward that credential straight onto your insurer. They'll then basically download that and be like, okay, is it in policy? No. Okay, well, here's an offer to add it. And there's no, because they've got the data in proper form, they know that it came from you, that you paid for it, for what price, at what time, from what store, and therefore they can pull all of this together. The what store is the trust registry part, basically, because like buying and like, let's say I had a receipt from yourself. Obviously, you like it's kind of the McLovin idea out of Superbad. Like anyone's just made it up. Whereas if you can get the credential from the right place, suddenly that has way, way, way more value. And so what we have on the network is effectively decentralized identifiers for companies. And then they basically have a hierarchy all the way down into like, what is the end company or what is the agent? And the agent or company can be on multiple registries to be like, okay, I trust you for this, but I don't trust you for this. So it's really about this like hierarchical trust. I realized that was a long ramble considering what you asked.
No, it's fascinating, right? So I have a couple of different questions running around in my head, but it sounds a lot. Did you remember TCRs, like token curated registries, back in like 2019?
I do, but I can't remember what they were for.
So essentially, it's like it is weighting the registries, like you're saying, like who is the business, and authenticating that these businesses have different weights, almost like an Angie's List, like on chain. I mean, even Angie's List is kind of an antiquated thought these days. But it's something that it sounds to me like these registries, and then the authentication in the TCR is just slightly different in that it authenticates by peer review, essentially. People stake their tokens and say, look, I think that this is a good company. And then you can sort of weight a list or a hierarchy based on those reviews. So it was really popular in 2019. I mean, I'm still kind of a big fan of them. We're using a similar system of registry for what they call PLMN in radio, right? So basically it's the, when you have your phone and it might say like, Claro or Verizon or whatever that is. That broadcasting identity is a registry. And then basically in order to list or weight that, you'll have an on-chain registry for that, which is, I think, the other big question I have is, how do y'all think about why putting these things on chain as opposed to having them off chain?
Yeah, good question. And just a brief aside as well, I was at an event on Wednesday, which was run by I think it's Linux Decentralized Trust, but it was in the Vodafone offices. One of the presentation, and one of the presenters was from GSMA, talking about stablecoin adoption and how they're going to like potentially link it in with SIM cards and all this stuff. I'll see if I can get a hold of the presentations, because it feels like exactly the kind of thing that would be well up your street. But anyway, the reason for like bringing this stuff on chain is, I probably should make it clear that for us, individual data is never on chain. So everything for individuals is issued off ledger. The reason behind that is, if it's on ledger, it's obviously visible. And that means that you can have some like PII and privacy leakage if you get it wrong. But the reason for having kind of trust registries on ledger is typically they refer to organizations, and therefore having organization identifiers on ledger is like therefore kind of critically important, mostly because of hierarchies. So the ability to say, like, I trust this company within this context, but I also trust them within a different context, but the authority for each of those is very, very different. And then the other side of it is being able to show that historically, which might be like, okay, for a given amount of time, this organization was authorized to issue credentials of this type. However, this lapsed, but we can still show that that was true at a given time. And one of the chances, if you do that, say, just using a web server, if you have no like cryptographic link whatsoever, the server is basically the like arbiter of truth, and they can just lie. And so to give like maybe two examples, or certainly an example of the first, like you might have a university degree from a university, and obviously that is like a given set of trust that is to do with like higher education. You might separately be employed by the university, which is an entirely different set of trust, which is like, this organization employs me, and that isn't reliant on the fact that they're a higher education company. And so those hierarchies are very different, and make kind of just have different nuances. But really, one of the biggest things for having this on ledger is that kind of verifiable provenance, especially historically, because it prevents you just making stuff up. And I think that's kind of why ultimately all of us use ledgers at the base, is you have this independent source of truth that isn't just like he said, she said. I'd be really curious kind of how you're looking at this as well, given that you've got those lists as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of similar ethos of how we're thinking about the future, right? In terms of like, you're talking about AI agents. For us, it's the economy of machines, right? Whether that's routers or devices that are participating in a telecom or energy network. These things have choices, and so then we ended up to kind of your point, how do we create trust, and how do we interact them, and really we created this IFI DEX, this infrastructure finance DEX, and while there is a UI and humans can interact with it, it was really created for this sort of programmatic choice structure. And I wanted to kind of get into that a little bit with y'all too, because I know you're really thinking about, okay, well, can AI agents like have LP positions? I mean, for us, this is how we think about the flow. You might have, radio towers that are earning revenue, and then you can set strategies up so that $10,000 a month, some of that's going off and either paying back a lending type of thing programmatically or swapping. So you could have a compute token that could swap to stables. All these kinds of things could happen programmatically. And so for most of what we're thinking about, like our Althea chain doing is interacting with, probably a machine intelligence of some sort. So I'm really curious about how you're thinking about that too.
It's interesting. I mean, transparently, I maybe hadn't got that far. Mostly because, well, I guess thinking about it in two separate ways. Like we, using your example of the DEX being used by like machines in the background, we've enabled fee abstraction. I think we're going to be bringing an update live, I think in the next couple of weeks, which will hopefully bring all of that properly live. I don't know if anyone else has done this, like including yourselves, but like the only way of like bringing fee abstraction online is to like go and implement it in prod and then like start figuring out where it's broken, because there isn't a test way of doing it as far as we can tell. But what it means is that like you will be able to pay check fees using pretty much any token routing via Osmosis. And obviously right. Osmosis started off as like very much a retail facing DEX. And what we're shifting to using it for is basically like behind the scenes conversions for companies. Because what we've done is, or what we'll be doing is enabling USDC and EURE, which are both micro-regulated stablecoins, which allow us to kind of position ourselves in front of the EU and be like, okay, well, you don't need to have exposure to the underlying like volatile token if you can't, but ultimately all of those fees are still getting resolved down to check under the hood. So we're kind of on the DEX side, we've done something very, very similar in terms of like, it's now becoming this, exchange that is really, you may not even see it, like if you're using stuff on the network. I think then on the agent side, we've been more focusing on, actually, to be fair, we've been like, they will have accounts to be able to do stuff and register and kind of move around in terms of trust. Mainly what we've been focusing on is how do agents resolve trust registries and how do they interpret that and how do they make that visible to users and other agents. So that's been fascinating because we've been able to move it. We're able to have an agent interrogate the network, find all this trust registry, and then be able to kind of demonstrate that off elsewhere. And we did that using MCP and then surfaced it into Claude, which was pretty cool because then we could be like, okay, prove who you represent and how this works. And it could basically diagram out where all the trust came from, which was pretty cool. I don't think we've got as far as you guys have in terms of like where that revenue and stuff is going to come from and how it's going to interact with DEXs though.
Well, if I can jump ahead a little bit, I think that's one of the kind of exciting ways that, we can work together because we're, connected. We can be connected through IBC. And you can use something called interchain accounts, which means that your agents can interact with our DEX, or our, smart machines or users can then interact with your chain, and maybe even some sort of attestation or registry or something like that can actually kind of cross-chain work. So yeah. And
on that note, we can't say exactly who it is yet, but we should have an announcement early next week of I'm trying to figure out how much I can say here, but basically along those lines of like going down the partnership where agents would be able to like operate independently and leverage our trust registries to do so, which would be pretty cool. So I think that's hopefully early next week, but it's exactly along those lines that you described, which is going to be very fun to have out.
Well, a little bit of alpha here. This is why y'all come to the Althea community call. I think we've got some big announcements coming next week as well with partnerships. So I think if you're on the call, make sure y'all stay tuned to cheqd. Where would they find this announcement? On your Twitter or Discord, or what's the best place to follow you?
So it was certainly on Twitter. I think it might be kind of across quite a few Twitter accounts if based on who it's with. So keep an eye on our Twitter account, but it's going to be pretty good fun. And I think it's very much the start as well. Like we're seeing more of, seeing more and more agent marketplaces, both in Web 2 and Web 3, needing trust. And I think what's really cool is because we already had the infrastructure for companies, we're basically just repurposing it, leveraging it for exactly the same thing. It's good fun. So, yeah, I'm curious what your stuff is though. How many hints are you available or able to share on what's coming for Althea next week?
Yeah, well, I would say that, folks have been participating in testnetting the I5 DAX. We've been utilizing a lot of different stablecoins, including USDS and SUSDS, to really round that out. So you can think about not only can machines, do swaps, there's also different opportunities with the full kind of fledged DeFi, which is what I think is so exciting, right? So once you have the trust, once those agents can kind of come online, they can really also do a lot of smart, secondary financial things, right? So I think that's what I'll say on that.
I think as well. I was on the space recently, and they were talking about how they reckon agents will basically be the thing that solves the mess of like cross-chain UX, because it will just manage everything for you. And yes, you'll pay some fees here or there, but it's effectively just going to be using routers in the background, and you'll never have to think about this stuff going forward, which is exactly what it should be. It should be just any denomination of a token or asset is fungible with all of the others, and you just don't need to worry. There's just one balance is where we need to move to, and ultimately everything behind the scenes just becomes a rail. So I really hope that's the case, because it is, part of the language, a pain in the arse at the moment.
Yeah, but I think that's right. And we've spent a lot of time as far as kind of putting those things under the hood. So like users of Althea, if you have that internet in your house, you're just using, Stripe, and and then there's bridging behind the scenes as well. But yeah, I think that's really, what's emerging. And then that complexity is just kind of under the hood. And of course, then it can interact across chain and so forth. And I think that's a lot of the benefit of like the Tendermint or, SDK ecosystem, is the bridging is pretty seamless and things like that.
I think as well, like IBC just generally as a technology seems to be, I was speaking to Interchain Labs earlier. I don't know how much of this is public, so I won't go into the details, but like they seem to be speaking to any number of projects around like bridging the hub to whatever the protocol is via IBC. And yeah, I think we're going to get the benefit of that as cheqd, after some surprise conversations recently. But it's seriously, it's been one of the best like products I think to come out of Cosmos is IBC by like a country mile.
The other one is, of course, the EVM stack, right? So Althea is a hybrid EVM, so we could standardize across everything. You interact with it with your MetaMask wallet and things like that. So I think that's the other kind of big. Yeah.
I've got so many questions. It's something that we're, I think, assessing, because it's one area where every so often it comes around in like client requirements or like product surveys. But what's really strange for us is whenever we ask why, there isn't like we need it for X. There's just just like we want EVM. Like, but why? So for us, we're in this weird like trying to figure out, do we just build it and deploy it because it's a tick box that is expected of us, or do we kind of like okay, until this actually needs doing, we're just going to hang fire? Whereas I think obviously the benefit of assuming we do adopt it, it is such a massive ecosystem, and there's so many developers out there, and it is still extremely easy to pick up. So I'd love for your take on kind of what made you pull the trigger.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons. One is that, of course, we have a similar type of clientele, right? Enterprise business, so forth. If you're looking at how those clients can establish trust, right? There's the Solidity has kind of known standards. It's been multiple audited across lots of different chains. It's much easier to get audits. I think that we can all get a little more comfortable around like the robustness of the EVM, right? That's a very known quantity, and it's easy as you add more features to get more audits on top of that. So I think that's one side of it. The other side of it is that all of the wallet interfaces, right? So all of the UI that currently exists is very smooth and integrated into, multiple different applications on the EVM side, right? So building new applications and then integrating them with interfaces is much easier in EVM.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, it is something similar to what we've heard in terms of, especially the tooling. I like, as great as like COSM wasm may be, it just there is part of it which is like it just hasn't been around for as long, and it doesn't have as broad adoption, and therefore, yeah, it's always trying to punch upwards. So no, I was really curious because it comes up every so often for us, like. Yeah, I'd say that every 6 months we probably see it, but it's for us, it's never come with we need it for X and Y. It's always like this would be nice to have, or not even nice to have. It's like in terms of the Moscow thing. It's not even like must should. It's like way down to could or maybe in the future, which is weird.
Yeah, I think it's a bit like when I think about like APIs, right? Everybody has to have like some sort of standard tooling to integrate with their whatever. I mean, like I said earlier with telecom, that's the market would have probably been disrupted much earlier, but there's integration friction, right? There's different types of billing and routing and protocols and so forth. So the more that we can get standardized, the more that these things can then evolve more quickly. But to your point, I think what's happening is we are able to rapidly iterate with a new kind of machine and agent economy. It just is a little quicker than maybe a human cycle. But I wanted to, while we have some time, I wanted to tease out a little bit about the sovereignty piece, right? How do humans, one, protect things that they maybe want to keep sovereign to themselves. Maybe they don't want their receipts online. And then the other question is pseudonymity, right? Like, what if you want to be someone else online than you are in the physical world? Is that possible? What do you know? Is that, how does that work?
Cool. Yeah, happy to. So the sovereignty side of things, really, like everything that we build is still very much that you should own, control your data and remain as private as you want to. So the way that is certainly using our infrastructure is typically done is you have an identifier for the company on Ledger or any issuing organization. So it could be like the government, it could be a company, it could even just be like a community of people who issue credentials for a meetup or some like contribution to a development community. So like organization could be extremely flexible. It could even be potentially a device going forwards or an agent. Like it really is going to be very, very flexible. Actually, I'll use a use case that I heard the other day, which it was really, really cool that I'd not heard of before. So in this scenario, they basically have let's say it's like shipping and logistics, or possibly even like rental car agencies. And what they want to move to is a signal-based system, more focused around companies and shipping, which is the shipping or carrier will have a set of agents, and the agents will monitor the users of the shipping containers and who they have commercial relationships with, and they'll issue out signals which are, did this person pay their bill? Did they welch on their bill? And they'll share this out as like a signal. And so the actual person this is the subject of can be like, I can get credentials which say that I'm a good actor, and I can then use that to then maybe get credit or get favorable terms or just build this relationship or even move between like an ecosystem or consortium. And all of that data kind of could be issued to them. But the other side of it is the organization could also issue those credentials out or just signals out in general, which then allows other people to be like, oh, actually they didn't pay their bill, and therefore this is like critically important, and actually have this like shared intelligence. So there's two different ways of kind of doing this and two different models. But if you bring it back to individuals, the model is very much like an organization issues credentials or data to an individual, all of that is literally secret to those two parties. No one else sees it. The party themselves, the individual, can then share that data onto effectively whoever they wish or not. So all of this has to be done with informed consent. So you only receive credentials if you're willing to accept them, and you only share credentials or data if you're willing to share that stuff. Now, there is obviously a trade-off, which is if someone asks you for data and they need it and you're not willing to give it, you won't be able to access that service, whatever it is. Like the classic example is borders. Like if you want to cross a border and you're not like you want to do it legally, you're going to have to show your passport. There's no real way around that. However, there are other scenarios where you maybe say have a driving license and all you're wanting to do is like buy a beer, cigarettes, to gamble, whatever, that is age restricted. And what you can do instead is just share a proof, which is I'm over the age of 18. And so I think what this might look like in terms of going into a bar in the future is I don't need to share my driving license because actually it has my home address on. Instead, all I share is I'm over the age of 18 or 21, depending on where you're at. And here's my picture, so you know that it's me. And actually, if it's something else and like maybe I just need to prove my age online, I can do that without having to share anything else. And I think that's when you get more towards like anonymity and pseudonymity, where the party receiving that data might see that you have like a unique ID, but that unique ID is only for that interaction. And if you go and speak to someone else and you share different credentials, you'll have a completely different unique ID, and there's nothing to tie the two of you together. We actually have a demonstration of this in Creds where we're issuing credentials for community participation and membership. And if I share data to one person and I share a different set of credentials to different people, there is nothing to link me. As long as I chose different credentials, there's no like unifying link. And so that's one of the really big principles inside kind of decentralized ideas. You don't have this like linkability. And probably just a brief aside, there's inside the US at the moment, there's a movement going on called No Phone Home, which is, I don't know if you've come across it. Yeah, so one of our partners actually started it off. He's far too humble, but he presented at a thing called Internet Identity Workshop in California. He started, basically looked at the specs for mobile driving licenses, turned up and was like, I think I found this thing where like anyone who issues these documents can track where they're being used. And it turned into basically this now movement where people are, I think, messaging their Congress people, I think their state legislature, whatever the like, governance structure is, to be like, we don't want this. We don't want this like surveillance thing. So I'm surprised. It's cool that you've heard about it. I'm genuinely surprised.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of the impetus, well, not maybe obviously, but a lot of the impetus for Althea was really creating and bringing agency and freedom, kind of protecting those core freedoms that we think about online, which is being able to, choose and to have freedom of speech and choose what you are going to expose to the rest of the world. And I think, you really hit the nail on the head. A lot of people don't or aren't aware or aren't making a deliberate choice about what it is that they are sharing with their provider, whether it's Comcast or Verizon, and in turn, what they're sharing with, the government. Right? We don't make a conscious choice about those sorts of things. And what's happening is there is a lot of data, and there's a lot of telemetry, and there's a lot of those things that are just happening passively. And then, so I think part of what we did with Althea is you actually choose how you exit out, how your traffic gets decrypted online, so that you can even operate your own exit or own kind of VPN server there. So that's a lot of the principles around why we think creating these sovereign systems is so important, because right now, passively, we're really giving up a lot of our information about ourselves, and we may not even realize it or feel like we have a choice. We can take it back.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's the example given by Steve at Anonymy Labs, which was the guy who kind of pulled this out. He gave the example of like, let's say you're working for a company an events company and they're running an event, and for whatever reason, like one of the suppliers hasn't shown up, and you're expecting like a certain vintage of like champagne or some basically something that is like relatively hard to source. Again, theoretical example. You send one of your staff or an intern round to as many stores as possible to go and pick up this, like, say, bottle of alcohol, something like difficult to source, especially if it's booze. They, in this area, like in this example, are having to use their driving license to go and prove their ID every single time. They're showing up at like multiple stores, multiple off licenses, like places that are like very obviously for buying booze. And suddenly, if you've got a government that is watching that, you then have like an intern or this staff that somehow, because they had no idea they're being surveilled. They're literally just doing their job and doing what their employers told them to do. End up on some like watch list for being an alcoholic and needing social services and support, even though they're literally just doing their day-to-day job, because the inference of the data that they didn't even know was being collected is suddenly being used for a purpose that they had no idea, which again, highly theoretical example, but it's like a pretty extreme example to be like, if you're not aware of what's going on, it can have some pretty scary consequences if it doesn't end up or doesn't it isn't used in a good way.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, and having the right to privacy and choice about what you share about yourself is it in no way implicates you as being a bad human being or immoral or illegal or whatever else. I mean, these things are have been, throughout history been repeatedly abused for bad reasons. I mean, your example may be theoretical, but we certainly have seen throughout time that these sorts of, especially when we are doing so much based on heuristics these days, right? It looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, well, it must be a duck, but that's not always the case, and you could end up being victimized by just pattern matching and heuristics.
Yeah, and there's I don't know if you've seen it's not necessarily on the privacy side, but more on like the IP protection side. I think it was Denmark passed a law, or they're looking to pass a law where every individual will own a copyright for their likeness, which means that if it is ever replayed by any kind of LLM or anyone, I mean, really what they're targeting is basically deep fakes, and especially like deep fake porn is basically really what they're trying to guard against. But I find the whole thing fascinating because like it's not something that I don't believe there's ever been a precedent for, and I think it is like potentially really really powerful. It probably has some very like some unintended consequences, but I've never seen anything similar before, and I'm really fascinated as like how that protection is going to work out and how it's going to reshape a lot of what's going on at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's why the identity piece of it is so important, and how we handle that, and really how we're building these systems now will in fact shape a lot of that regulation and a lot of how these systems evolve in the future. So I think what you all do is really really important, and how we think about that right now, those choices. And a lot of what we focus on is the infrastructure. We're talking about the glass in the ground and the radio towers, and when those are owned in a decentralized way, when there's many different stakeholders, this is where we can kind of come in and protect. We have the leverage to protect human agency and sovereignty. And so that's a lot of kind of like how we think about how we're crafting systems that evolve, and hopefully to a better future that gives more people opportunity, and gives people back that agency that they have. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too, because I think the blockchain in general, the industry that evolved as sort of a movement in the beginning, has kind of changed, and a lot of those kind of core principles that coordinated many different entities have now kind of become just a corporate wrapper. Curious your thoughts, if you feel the same way, or if you feel like it's becoming just more accessible, or how do you think about how the industry is evolving?
It's hard to tell, to be honest, because I'd say we at cheqd have like maybe a little bit like yourselves. We use all the underlying tech, we contribute back, we do all of that. Like there's all the community side of stuff, and obviously we see adoption into Web3, especially with the agent platforms. However, we're probably spending like less and less time in the kind of crypto world and more time in like enterprise Web2, speaking to those people, especially from an adoption perspective. Like a lot of our partners are working on behalf of large enterprises, like looking to roll out at scale. And so, like, whilst from a tech perspective and I'd say community perspective, and still like on the agent side, I would say like very much on the BD side of things, I follow less and less of the industry because still, well, actually, probably part of the reason is like Twitter becoming a cesspit, but also like it just more and more protocols just being associated with like meme coins and like that kind of casino style thing. When we're probably, I think a lot like yourselves, just more focused on like actual genuine adoption and solving problems and building out that way and being much more product focused and solving problems outside of the crypto sphere. So I think we just spend less time looking at it than we ever have done before because like so much of crypto and Web3 seems to be like less focused on solving problems and more on like meme coin casino stuff right now. I don't know if I love your opinion because I think similar focuses, but maybe you're seeing something different.
Well, I think you definitely hit a couple of things that I think is really true, right? You have this bifurcation where you have projects that are utilizing the coordination of blockchain and a lot of the transparency and all of these immutability, which is one of the things you brought up earlier, is being able to have that history that doesn't change. And RWA has really brought that into focus as well. So there's a lot of conversation kind of happening around bringing the real world assets on chain. And I think that's actually really evolving in a positive way. But to your point, that feels a little bit more like, utilizing technology to solve a problem. Whereas, there still is going to be that kind of fun, silly attention economy. And that's really loud and noisy because that's the economy that it is attention and fun and games and all of that. And it's not necessarily bad as long as people are informed about the choices that they're making. I mean, I would say that one of the frustrating things that I see is that we don't peer review well enough within our own industry to help build systems of transparency around projects themselves. So I would love to see that.
I think that, and there's often a like not built here mentality where you see the same idea getting just replayed on a different protocol, or like the same thing being built in multiple places, and you're like, we don't need many of these things, like just one would have been fine. Or so I think that happens quite, or it's solving a problem which is already solved in a perfectly solid way. It just didn't have a token attached to it and someone's like latched onto it that way. I think what has been interesting, and maybe one thing we have seen, I would say, inside the SSI kind of decentralized ID world is there's been much more of this like movement to it being a spectrum. So you used to have like the centralized maxis, you had the decentralized maxis, and now it's much more moving into this like actually it's going to be both depending on what the options are. And actually it's just going to be on this like constantly moving spectrum of like, let's say you're operating inside a company, your identity within that company is defined by your relationship to that company. Therefore, it doesn't make sense to be decentralized because it's literally the definition of centralized. However, your ability to then say move between healthcare systems, your ability to travel, all of that is highly decentralized because there's no way of that relationship being defined by a central party. So I think we've seen that soften. I think that's where this movement back towards privacy recently has been really interesting, is as people moved into this like world of a spectrum, somewhat this like self-sovereign decentralized ID, which was very much like privacy maxi, was somewhat being sacrificed or softened. And it was moving much more towards this like, oh, you can do all this stuff, but it's like very quick adoption, but we maybe don't know about how the privacy is going to work. We'll figure it out. And now there's more of this like backlash again, which is like, no, we're not doing this if we don't have the privacy side of stuff sorted. So yeah, it's been a weird journey over the last 4 years. It was very much like decentralized AD, privacy maxis, then it's softened, and now it feels like we're going back. We're somewhere in the middle, but there's much more noise about getting back to something private again, and down to like, and also moving back to trust. Moving back into like, as you're getting AI, as you're getting deep fakes, like the need for trust is becoming way more apparent than it ever has been. So I think it's so many moving narratives all at the same time, but it's politically, in terms of that spectrum, it's been very, very interesting to follow.
Yeah, such a good segue as we're kind of wrapping up toward the end of the hour too. Like, what do you think is coming? Like, what's the next year or two for cheqd look like?
It's kind of breaking into three. One is all the core identity stuff that we've been doing. So we're seeing clients coming to our partners, like asking for us as part of their solutions to do payments for credentials and creating these like attribute credential markets. So we're seeing that. I think that is going to just carry on taking off. We're seeing more and more projects deploying. We're now making connections between different projects that don't know about each other, which has been really fun. So we had a big theory about 3 years ago that there was going to be all these network effects, and the quicker we got those going, the quicker ecosystems would go. That's now like definitely paying off. The next one I would say is basically all this like agentic economy side of things. So we think there's a huge opportunity for decentralized identity and trust registries for agents representing companies specifically. That seems to be like the segment we're aiming for and doing really well with. Where how do you have any counterparty assess an agent and know if it's representing the right company for the right scope at the right time, all of that kind of stuff. So I think that's going to take off massively, like I'd say over the next couple of years. And the other one is content credentials. So is this piece of content, did it come from the right place at the right time? If it was edited, who was it edited by? How was it edited? Did that change anything material about it? So I'd say that's probably the third kind of area that we think there's going to be like massive growth in. So it's almost like the traditional stuff where the subject is either a company or an individual. Then you've got the next one where the subject is the kind of agents. And then the final one is where actually you're focusing more on the content of the credential, and it's all about the content. So especially in this kind of age of like deep fakes and misinformation, starting to identify where that's coming from, or at least if you're looking at something, can you trust it? So yeah, I'd say those three are probably the biggest ones. I think the first two will probably be the quickest, but it's the numbers are just colossal. That's the bad thing with all of this, is the numbers are really starting to get quite impressive. And I think that's without really the agents or the content credential stuff, where I think if we think of orders of magnitude, like there's enough people, then there's going to be like an order of magnitude of like 10 to 100 agents per person. That's an order of magnitude up. And then if you're looking at content off the back of that, the amount of content that you see per day is going to be thousands and thousands times whatever individuals and agents are. So yeah, I'd say it's probably those three. What about yourselves?
Oh my goodness, yeah, it's we're in a similar boat of like maybe there's not even enough time to talk about it all. But we're very excited about really kind of being at this point of scale. So Althea's been around for a long time, really building iteratively the routing, the machine-to-machine building platform, and really now also being fully cellular stack. So developed our own 4G, 5G core, and some really exciting things coming on eSIM, roaming, orchestration, and all of that here over the next little bit. And then of course the kind of the sovereign kind of financial ecosystem wrapper around all of that too, and that's the liquid infrastructure that's really coming on chain in a meaningful way, and that's the tokenized telecom assets, so that allows for like different kinds of financing and funding that can help build these capital intensive projects in the infrastructure space, and then that creates a lot of revenue flows, and of course there's fun things that can happen around secondary stuff like lending, auction verification modules and things like that that's coming along.
I love that you mentioned that. Just a really quick interjection. Like one of the bits I'm really excited about in like, I think it'll be a year or two, is once you have these revenue streams for data, is securitizing them and creating secondary markets for them. So having like data-backed securities. And I guess your equivalent would be like, actually, this came up on Wednesday, like bandwidth-backed securities, like all this stuff that you can actually fractionize, tokenize, and then bring onto a market is really, really cool. So sorry, just reminded me of something that I'm super excited on the next side for maybe a couple of years' time.
Yeah, no, exactly right. I think that's really what's evolving right now, and it allows a lot of interesting things to scale, and really kind of these economies to form around that. But yeah, I think it's just like energy, right? Like energy, bandwidth, all these types of utilities that are really deeply involved in, and non-cyclical too, right? You really like these are things that are pretty much they don't churn a lot. And they sort of keep steady in an economy that's very much like this, and especially as we see real estate sometimes even go up and down. Having something that's going to be more steady, like energy, like bandwidth, I think is really important in telecom. So yeah, it's a big year or so for us, really taking what we've built, what's been working. It's always funny too, because Althea is going to launch with the killer app already. It's already like the large percentage of Gnosis chain volume. And so now when we start unlocking the chain and that goes more live, then, the killer app's already there, right? We don't have to go look for it. So that's what we're excited about as well. So,
Fantastic. Congrats.
Yeah, just to kind of wrap up as well too, I think you had mentioned earlier that you have a couple different Twitters, and where does the community find you if they want to learn more about cheqd?
Yeah, absolutely. So head to our Twitter. So I think cheqd_IO, or find us on Telegram or Discord. And probably the final thing is, keep an eye out early next week. Sorry, suddenly the volume behind me has gone up massively. But yeah, basically come and find us on certainly early next week, because there should be a pretty big announcement. Really looking forward to that one. And otherwise just generally follow us, and I think there'll be a pretty good slew of announcements over the coming months.
I noticed you all are also on LinkedIn too. So we Althea has a decent LinkedIn presence as well, because obviously the enterprise, the business connection there too. So
Good point.
Folks are a little bit more closer to my age and a little older and would like to be on LinkedIn.
Yeah, actually, that works for me as well. Yeah, so go find us there, and then you don't have to open up X, which might be good for your sanity.
Right, exactly. Well, hey, Fraser, it's been great. I hope to have on you, and I'm excited about the things that as Althea becomes unlocked, the DEX comes online. I think there's a lot of intersection as we can utilize the credentialing and the work that you've done on the trust identities over there on our DEX as well. So I think we'll see probably an evolution of those kinds of partnerships too.
Honestly, would love to. So yeah, looking forward to it, and make sure to stay in touch.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for being here, and we'll see you all next week. Have a good one.
Thanks all. Bye.